Hello, welcome back. Today, Terry and my name is Melissa Skinner. I'm one of the pastors at Fifth Avenue Church, and I have here Terri Reed, a friend of mine, and two of our friends, Sierra Webster and Zach Schwartz. And today we wanted to interview them or have just a little discussion about a project they worked on in the past and how that aided them along their journey and how they saw that interacting with other people. So the project I heard you guys talk about is called O.P.A.T, which is an acronym, and it's a curriculum that you guys were involved with. Could either of you or take turns tell us what O.P.A.T stands for and what it is all about?
So O.P.A.T stands for Our Place at the Table. And it was something that was created in the Northwest. We both used to be a part of an organization called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And so Northwest staff for InterVarsity created this curriculum to be run basically as a conference. So usually it was just like one day conference starting from in the morning, ending in the evening. But what it is basically an opportunity for folks who identify as white to have a conversation about race in a place where they can make mistakes. And so it's an opportunity for folks who are white to talk about hard racial things and not have to check themselves or be scared to make a mistake, and then to learn how to not make that mistake again in the future. So it really is just something that was a need to say, like, okay, our friends of color, specifically Black folks, are exhausted trying to have to teach all of these white folks how to talk about race, have this discussion. And O.P.A.T was an opportunity for us as white people to teach other white people and say, what are your questions? What are your hangups? And how can we move together in conversations about racism in America and culture and identity? Anything to add?
I think I would just add that kind of the things that some of the main tenets I would say that we kind of focused on was like learning like what white culture is, kind of the history of whiteness, and like white people, and just kind of, I guess, just like a foundation for the conversation that I think a lot of white people maybe don't have because it's just so natural to us and it's dominant in a lot of our spaces. And so just kind of giving people language for those kinds of things.
That was something that was impactful for me too. I've never attended an O.P.A.T conference, but just as I've done my own looking around and listening, I never realized that I already assumed that I was the normal and I was the average. And even just today, I don't even know why I thought of it, but I was like, oh, if I was asked what race I am, and because I have kind of a different idea of what the word race means, because it was kind of like made up specifically for a purpose. And so I was like, oh, well, what race do I identify with? Obviously, I interact with the world as a white person, but I was like, oh, so I'm an American of European descent. And I was like, wait, why don't I ever say that I'm a European American? But someone who's an Asian descent person, they might say that I'm an Asian American or a Black American or whatever the person has as their ancestry. I was like, oh yeah, I have ancestry too. So, like I didn't realize that even the fact that I don't even put a word with it could be part of the fact that I kind of consider myself just the normal kind of American,
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry, go ahead, Terry.
No, go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say, it's interesting because I remember growing up and like, I'm from the Midwest and there's a pretty significant like German American population there, right? And people who are German American are typically white. But it was always interesting because like my family didn't have a lot of what I was aware of connection to our German ancestry. But then there was other families that like really did have that connection. to their European descent. But that was like not the norm. And so just what you're saying, Melissa, is it is an interesting thing that like we just go along with like, oh, I'm white, and nobody's going to be like, well, where's your family from?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I remember just this summer, I'm in my 40s. Just this summer, I actually asked my dad to bring a book that one of his distant cousins and his sisters created as they journeyed to Ireland, where um, some of my family is from. And so not knowing anything, and they didn't know much either. And so we just kind of assume that we are, like you said, we're Americans and we identify as white. And isn't that, but there's so much more. I was even actually doing a little bit of research in trying to identify, what is white culture? I mean, that sounds like maybe that's a naive question, or but some people might go, yeah, I have no idea. And I had a hard time finding where people were actually putting a finger on what it was. There were things that it was defined by maybe a lack of some things, some ambiguity, but it was just really interesting to me. There was a disconnect from legacy or heritage. And I think that's, to your point, that's kind of what we're talking about here, that we just kind of assume and we kind of go along, and there are some questions to be asked. So yeah, interesting.
So, or anything you were going to say, Zach?
No, I think that's I think that's actually a really deep question, Terri, of like, what is white culture? Because that's one of the most important aspects of what OPAT helps people identify. And it's hard to find out at first.
I think especially for white people, for the reasons we're talking about, is it's like, so it's what we're entrenched in. So it's hard to pick out those things as like being different than other types of cultures.
Yeah, I think learning about white culture and white history and even the origin of what white is, I think it can be so eye-opening, and I don't know how to put into words why it was impactful to me, but it made me just have a perspective, just like any perspective. I didn't have any perspective. So it gave me a perspective, and it was a very rich perspective because it had like the good and the bad and the ugly, and I have to face it all. And I feel like it's better than just saying I'm the center of the universe, and like that's the only thing that defines me, and I don't even need to define that. It's just like, let me know if you want to be different than me, but I'm just going to do my thing. But finding out like, oh yeah, there are commonalities that make my culture, and there's some parts that I really love. Like if I had to pick any, I would love my culture for this reason, and then other parts I'm like, wow, this other culture has really got that handled better than us, or and then historically, just looking back at things that have gone well and things that have gone not well. Sometimes I can even think, I can be fairly open-minded, so I can think like, okay, I'm not going to call anything bad or good. I mean, some things are bad and some things are good, but many things, it's like they were pursuing this good thing, which had these good and bad consequences or whatever, So even looking back and saying like, wow, we're sure individualistic and rugged and hardworking. Like we value that so much, like that's so cool. And then sometimes that has some like where we didn't realize it would cause certain side effects if you go to the extreme of it or whatever. So yeah, just looking instead of not looking, I feel like just makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
So what have either Zach or Sierra, what have you seen as some of the hangups that white people have had with the issue of racial equality? Because you've been in discussions and they've been in a safe place. And so I'm assuming that you've seen some things show up.
I was actually thinking about this question today, and I think something that I've noticed, maybe not necessarily in the OPAT curriculum, but just in general with white people starting to have conversations about these kinds of things and racism and stuff is, I think it's really easy for us because we're human to take criticisms of like whiteness very personally, and like make it about ourselves, which is like kind of a white people thing to do in general. But I think, yeah, just like feeling like, oh, like these things that like these criticisms that you have about whiteness or about like the systems in our country or like the things that people are saying about racism, I feel very like personally attacked. I think that is where people can kind of get hung up in thinking, feeling like they need to defend themselves or defend their family or defend the way they grew up or defend things that are good about their culture, about their family, and kind of immediately getting on the defense instead of being willing to recognize that it's a lot bigger than one person and one family and, you know, individuals.
Yeah. And that's always our goal, right? For us, I know Melissa and I have talked a lot. It's like, how can we create a safe space so that people can talk about what we don't know how to talk about and learn from each other and then kind of step towards each other in the process. Not with the full intent engaging in the conversation where I want you to understand me and come to my side of, without calling it aside, the beauty of your uniqueness and where you come from and all that you bring to this moment right now as a Christ follower, as a human being, as an American, whatever it might be, is valuable. And so how do we engage in those conversations without really taking, like you were saying, Sierra, things personally? And we just have such a hard time doing it. We just have such a hard time, even with the intent. Melissa and I were talking last week, and it's just like, even with the intent of this is what I intend to do. I want to bring people in and build bridges or whatever. And I find myself doing, like Paul says, the very thing that I don't want to do. I'm not meaning to pick a fight, but I'm making a judgment, or I'm trying to persuade in a really, really, aggressive way. So yeah, I think just identifying that we take things personally, and yeah, we all have our stories and they're valuable. So thank you.
I can relate to that hang up, Sarah, that you brought up as far as taking it personally. And my next question was going to say, can anyone relate, and what has helped you? And so I'm going to answer those and then open it up to you guys. So of course I can relate. And I think what has helped me to try to get past the like feeling like I'm being attacked or what I value is being said that it shouldn't matter or something, is to separate. So like if someone points out like this aspect of your culture is harming people, or this aspect of how society is set up is not landing fairly with everybody, I could take that and say, and think of my culture and think of all the good parts also and be like, what? You can't throw away all those good parts or whatever. But to try and separate it and say, like, we're pointing out specific things, not like, we're not saying down with white people and, anything you've ever thought or loved or cared about needs to go in the garbage so we can lift someone else up. It's, I don't know, I'm trying to describe like separating out and say it's okay to look at parts of your culture or parts of your history and say it's okay to admit that can be harmful or that one was harmful or whatever. And it doesn't mean that you or your entire people group are now discarded or whatever altogether. Does anybody else relate to that challenge of taking it personally, or another one, and how have you dealt with it?
I mean, I think something that I have kind of had to wrestle with in my own kind of like processing is, so I grew up in Georgia. So as a white Southern person, I think that there's a lot about that culture that I think I could feel a lot of shame about, and that is like really bad. Um, and there's just a lot there that was really like really hurtful to people. And I think similarly to what you were saying, Melissa, like being able to recognize that and say like, oh, that was bad and continues to be bad and continues to hurt people in the South. But then also be able to pick out the good things about that culture and the things that I've learned from like my family, and kind of be able to sit in the both and, I think, is not just like throwing the whole thing out, but saying like, okay, can I say, yes, these parts are bad and we need to figure out how to love people better. We need to figure out how to rectify this or make this right. And also say, but there are these good things that I am like thankful for, and like things that I can bring to the table that are good. And just kind of, I don't know, sitting in the like, yes, both are true.
Excellent point. I was just thinking, I thought I would ask you, and I may know the answer to this, but when you are explaining to a group of individuals, hey, this is what OPAT is, this is what the intention is, and there aren't Black people or people of color in the room. Do you find that makes people uncomfortable? Like, what are we trying to do here? And I think you both have done a great job of explaining what OPAT seeks to do, but can you remind us again, if someone is kind of tuning in and going, hey, so this is a conference where it's just for white people about white people, is that
Only.
or is that not what it is?
Yeah, it's funny because that's the first thing we address at OPAT, right? As we sit down and say, okay, look around, everybody here is white. Why does that make you feel uncomfortable? Right? And we're like, oh, because when like we as white people say this is a space just for white people, there's some inherent history that makes that bad. Right? And it is that place where it's like, okay, what is the, like, if it's just white people in a room, that's bad. It's like, well, that's not entirely true, right? Historically, there's a lot of bad spaces that have been, this is just for white people. But the reason that we address that in OPAT is because we've said, like, this is a space, one that's been like, not just designed by white people, like, right, like staff of color, other staff have said, this is something that we need, is this space. And the reason that exists without people of color in the room is because our friends of color were just tired. They were exhausted of having to do all of the work and to like watch, I guess, white people try and get it right without entering into the hard places within themselves. And there's something about the space just being white people where you can say, like, I don't understand white privilege and I don't think I have it. And that's fine. And there's not going to be the pressure of you need to show up and be like, I have this figured out. So it is an all white space where white people can make mistakes, but it's not designed to exclude. It's kind of, I guess, blessed by the community, to use a Christian word, of like, hey, this is something that is needed.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's designed for white people to bless all people.
Yes.
That's kind of, yeah, that's what I'm hearing. I have a friend, Kim, and I just adore her, but I, like you're saying, when I kind of became aware that, man, what is going on? And I have to say that I came to the table really late for me. I've moved through the guilt and the shame of all that because I'm where I'm at and I'm seeking to learn. but I would go to her and I would ask questions of her. And she was so gracious with me. But my sister actually was the one that shared with me, hey, we have a tendency to suck the life out of Black people or people of color when we're trying to figure it out. And sometimes you just got to take a step back. But I think what OPAT seeks to do is, when the question is, but where do I learn and what do I learn? Uh, that's the space for it, or that's a space for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I observed in my reading and listening is, like what you're saying, Terri and Zach, you've both mentioned, or probably everybody's mentioned it, but that it's exhausting. But also, I had never thought of the fact that, so when I can be insensitive and not understand how something would affect someone else. So like when I have heard history lessons about things that were hard, let's say, and especially the way it's written in a lot of history books, it's like, and then we did this, and then we enslaved some people, and then we got over it, but it's like from the perspective of the protagonist, and it was like, well, we did a faux pas. But that history, or even current day things that happen, weighs very heavily on many people of color. I can't say all, but and so when we ask questions, not that we shouldn't be asking, but just know the weight that it holds. If you say, like, what's the hardest thing that's happened to you, or like, the thing about slavery, what did this part mean? And it's like, that could be a gut punch, and one that they have to, like, it's like reliving trauma. It's what I've heard that it can be like. And yeah, that was just one thing that I had never considered, that it could be traumatic. Just like if I had, let's say, like I've had death in my family before, if someone was just like, if it was a wrongful death, like someone took their life, that hasn't happened in my, like, no one has murdered someone in my family. But let's say, something very gut-wrenching, obviously gut-wrenching. Let's say someone murdered one of my children. If someone would be like, if I was in class and someone's like, now who's had a child murdered? Oh yeah, you. Could you tell us, like, how does that affect things, or whatever? And you just act like it's nothing. Yeah, that would re-traumatize me, and I would have to recoup every day just living around these people that it's like it doesn't happen to them or something. Yeah, it's just an observation I wanted to share.
And this is like a story I've told before, but I used to live in Anchorage, Alaska, and work with predominantly Native Alaskan students in InterVarsity. But we had a conference, and it was led by the vice president, Scott Hall, vice president of
the National Director of Urban Programs.
Yes, for InterVarsity. So he's like he's somebody who would lead OPAT. He's kind of he's a white man who, when it comes to talking about race, justice, all that, he would be like, this guy's got it all together. He knows. He's a white guy who knows. But he came up to Alaska, and we had an icebreaker. And he asked a question that was, would you rather freeze to death or burn alive? Bad icebreaker. But what he didn't know is multiple people in the room who were Native Alaskan have had family members who were kind of just like introduced to alcohol and were alcoholics and had passed out outside and froze to death. So half the room went to the other side because they're like, I did it. Right. So there's these things that are traumatic that we don't experience as white people. And that's like a small example. And there's much bigger ones. Like, we both live in or have been around a lot of Native communities, and celebrating Columbus Day is like trauma that we just bring up over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so much we don't think of until we start looking into it. And sometimes I think it's hard to know where even to begin. Like, I don't even remember what I started Googling when I first became interested. I think I would just get on a rabbit trail of YouTube videos, and I just wanted to hear people talk that didn't look like me. And I wanted to hear like the differentest version of how life is, even though they live in that same country as me or whatever. Um, I'm like, oh wow, this person's talking about what it's like at school, and like, oh, and here's someone else down the line on YouTube, and this person's talking about what it's like at work, and they were the boss, but they were treated like they were the cleaner, and like, weird things. It makes me ask, so you guys have experience creating curriculum for white people. I've heard it called White People Do Your Homework. Do you guys have some ideas that you could give the viewers? We aren't in an OPAT conference, and it sounds like it's for college kids. Since we don't have one, do you guys have things that we could be looking up on our own? Like, what should we be typing into Google? What topics should we be looking into, like family history, or what matters?
Well, just something, I know Sierra talked about it, looking at the like holistic idea of who you are, right? So kind of balancing that good with the bad, and kind of figuring out what white culture is, but specifically what your white culture is. Because white from Iowa and white from Georgia are two different things, right? So white is an aspect that kind of adds to us, but it's not completely our identity. So I think what I would just like for people who are starting is to ask, like, what are some, I think they're idioms, right? Did you grow up with, right? So like time is money, or things like that, or cleanliness is next to godliness. So what are some of those idioms? Because not everybody has them, and not everybody has heard the same ones. And
so what's the difference if somebody's heard my idiom or not? Why does that matter?
Because it's a basis to defining culture, along with race. So, right, so you might hear like time is money, for example, is one that I heard growing up. But again, Midwest, white, that was just, everybody knew that. Everybody heard that around me. It was something that was said. I heard it in school. And then I went to, again, just a story, 'cause stories are effective. In Alaska, I was leading a Bible study, and it was designed for Native students. And the Bible study started at 5:30, and I showed up at 5:30, and my student leader, who was also Native, showed up 10 minutes late. And so I was like, okay, if you show up late, that's disrespectful, and you don't care about the thing. Time is money. That's the thing. And then half an hour later, nobody was there, and I was ready to pack my bags and be done. But trickling in were all these freshman Native students who were excited about Bible study, and they're like, all right, I'm here, let's get this thing going. And in my head, I'm like, I have to go home and eat dinner. Like, this thing's over in 15 minutes. And so that is like just a prime example of like, I grew up with this idiom that reflected the culture I grew up in of whiteness in the Midwest, where time is money. But in Native Alaskan culture, it's a time abundant culture, where it's like, I'm here, I'm in the present, and I'm going to stay where I'm at until I feel as though this time has been completed. And then I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is a different cultural value. And so the idiom time is money isn't spoken in there because it has no relevancy. It doesn't reflect the culture. So yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say that's so interesting because it's reminding me of a story, just how we view the Bible and scripture too, because my husband, Bob, his parents were missionaries to the Philippines, and as translating scripture about, and they're explaining to people that he's washed our sins, whiter than snow. Well, in the Philippines, what's snow? You don't know what it is. And so it was so interesting. It's kind of this, but it's this Yeah, that's a really great point. We just don't understand, and we assume things um, about, respect or understanding or all those things that you're talking about. And it's eye-opening.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's hard. It's easy to think back and look at like, oh, what are just some of those idioms that you grew up with, or like foods or things like, I don't know if anybody in this group has a little red plate that says like, it's your special day and it's a birthday plate. Mm-hmm. Right.
Obviously you do.
See, that's a very white cultural thing because it's a very individualistic, we're going to celebrate you, it's your birthday, it's all about you, and that's not always the case for celebrations. And then is it, I don't know if it's hanging up somewhere, but that's the other funny thing is like it hangs up over the mantelpiece or something, and it's like always this symbol. So just like once we get those things, then it's easier to know that not everybody has that in the nuances, right? Like Melissa has the plate, we don't. And then we can expand that out to other people in other places and recognize people's experiences are different from our own. And that's like a baseline that we need to be at.
Yeah, that sounds like, I can't remember the phrase I just had, but it's like, a low risk entry level thing. Cause it's not pointing any fingers, like there's nothing wrong with being timely, but it is important to know that your culture sees time in a very specific way. There could be other cultures that's even more strict than yours. It doesn't mean that the most strict is the best. And then, it's because whatever you think your culture is probably like, well, we're timely and they whatever, but it's not like they're not valuing time. They're valuing the time they spend where they are before they got to the Bible study and when they got to the Bible study. So it doesn't need to point any fingers, but it's great to start seeing the little things that are specific to you. I actually, we spent several years hosting international students from the U of O, the American English Institute at the U of O. And so we would have 1 to 2, usually guys, living at our house, at our last house. And so we would have usually Saudi Arabian or Japanese. Those were the most common that we would have. And it was so special. I loved hearing the different languages coming from down the hall. And I just felt so rich, like you couldn't buy this. It was so special. But we would run into those things all the time. And the time one reminded me, one of our Japanese students, I can't remember which one, but because it's been a while, but he was describing to me that in his country, if you didn't wear a watch, it was a huge sign of disrespect, at least to the older crowd, because it showed, I don't care about your time and I don't care about working hard. I'm just going to do my own thing. That's what no watch on your wrist means. He's like, but we have phones now. And so he was, the younger crowd is a little rebellious, but if you were going to go to work or if you're going to be around your grandparents, you made sure you put a very nice watch on and showed what a high value you were going to give toward time. And I remember at that time, I was like, wow, I'm so laid back. Like, people don't need to judge me about my wrist and my time or whatever. Like, I'll be as timely as I need to be or whatever, because that's that individual side of me. And then when I lived in Mexico for a little while, I remember when I was 19, me and some of my friends that were also American, we coined a phrase called, we were in Tijuana, in a suburb, and we called it a Tijuana minute, a New York minute. One of my friends was from New York, so he was like, well, I'm used to New York minutes. This must be like a Tijuana minute, because it was like you try and show up at church, the pastor would arrive maybe 15 to 30 minutes after you thought it was supposed to start. Then some people would trickle in. When there's enough people, maybe they'd start. Dinner was whenever they decided to make it. I can't generalize a whole country, but where I was living, that's what it was. So just knowing that time can be seen so differently. Like we've talked about 4 different cultures of time now with the Native Alaskans and the people of us on the screen and the people that I knew in Mexico and the people that I knew from Japan, 4 different ways. And they're, it's not even a one side of the coin or the other side of the coin. It's like we just are all specific.
Yeah. This is it's making me think about, so we've been like binge watching Survivor seasons during the pandemic. And one thing that we noticed is that it's mostly white people who are cast, and that when there are people of color, they get voted out, not always, but a lot of the times like earlier. Like a lot of times it's like the first person out. And we have just kind of been thinking and talking about like, why is that? Like, what's happening? Is it just blatant racism, or is like something else happening? And I think kind of what we've kind of come to is that it's those cultural differences. And so when people are setting up camp and like divvying out chores, like there's different communication styles, right? So like Black people are more direct and they are gonna have that more direct communication style, but then like the white people on the show are like, oh well, like they just have a bad attitude and they're just like being really bossy. And it's like, oh, because this person isn't acting like white people expect them to, like they're out of line. And so I think the problem with these, like, I don't know if it's a problem, like the cultural differences isn't a problem, but it's when like white people in dominant cultures say, oh, well, you have to be on time or else you're being rude or you're irresponsible or you don't take this job seriously or whatever it is, that then it's like, oh, the people that are being affected consistently by those expectations that are based in one culture are people of different cultures. And that's where I think you kind of, like we saw in Survivors, like, oh, like the Black people always get voted out first. Like, why is that?
Yeah, it's like having a difference is fine until it comes down to if there's a judgment call that needs to be made, where like if someone's succeeding or failing, then whoever's going to win, if there's a winner, or whoever's going to be seen as good is the one in the dominant culture of the people making the judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be like that no matter what the mix. If it was mostly a Black show, you'd probably see whatever culture that looked like, I don't know, like they weren't living up to the right standards of the culture judging, but it's most often that white culture is in the dominant. So along with the what should we be looking up or looking into, do you guys have places where you like to find resources for those of us not in a conference? Is it like, I like to Google this, or I like to read books about that, or I like to TED Talks personally?
Well, I think we've already kind of touched this, but just to give the fair warning, don't go running to your people of color friends asking for every experience that they've had. I'll just throw that out there, just so we're clear.
But kind of to go off of that, we were talking earlier, like how important stories are, and you don't want to go to your Black friends or your friends of color and say, oh, like, can you tell me all the traumatizing stories of your life so that I can learn to be empathetic towards you? But we can get those stories in other places, like in books and movies and stuff. And so a couple years ago, I made a commitment to only read books written by people of color for a year. And so I just think it's an opportunity to learn from people of color, but not like take things from your friends. And so I would say like also like follow, like if you're on Twitter, like following Black or Indigenous or Asian academics or theologians, reading books by them, watching movies with like creators of color. I think that's a way to kind of have the experience of getting those stories and building empathy without actually like requiring labor from your friends. And you're supporting those creators and those artists. So that's something that's been really huge for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I recently have noticed, for so long I was drawn to conversations where everybody would just acknowledge that I was right in the conversation or agree with me about something. And, I think it's easy right now in the political climate and with everything that's gone on, to find someone that you can, who may disagree with you and love them, or just acknowledge the difference right now. I'm finding that some of my best conversations now are with people that I don't see completely eye to eye with. My story doesn't look like theirs. And yet it's this, and I'm very aware too, as I'm listening and trying to listen. And I think Melissa had a great teaching a couple months ago just about how to be this empathetic listener, where you're not demonizing and you're aware of your own judgments that are going on. But it's so interesting how we so like to hang around people that are like us, that acknowledge us, that acknowledge our opinions and all that stuff. And yet the uniqueness of what we all bring truly is the body of Christ, being different, even when we differ on opinions that and they are sometimes opinions about what is true, even biblically, to step away and go throw up our hands. We can actually go, wow, I'm gonna put that on the shelf, or I'm gonna keep thinking about that or chewing on that, because it doesn't mean that we are not unified. It just means we may not have agreement in this area, but we're still, I don't know, together. Does that make sense? So maybe seeking out conversations or people that are different than we are. This might be a great thing to do for a while, and see where it takes us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's like, it's really hard to be open to change and be like, admit like, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong or need to think something differently like that. I just want, like, that's a really hard thing to do. Right. And that's why, like, 12-step programs are extremely hard and difficult, but also very fulfilling, because when you are able to do that, you see like life transformations. And I think, like, even in having those conversations, Terri, like the ability to say like, okay, maybe I'm need to change, or at least being open to that is very important. And like things that I've looked at and have been hard but also transformative are like even biblical commentaries, not by white people, are life-changing, but also really, really difficult, because when you grow up saying, okay, John 3:16 means this, and then you read a commentary on the book of John by a native person, and they have a totally different just exegesis about the entire book of John, it's hard to swallow, because you're like, have I been doing this wrong the whole time? Do I even know how to follow Jesus anymore? Like, what does this mean for me? And so, but I think that like that openness when you're reading those stories, and right, like I just remember we watched a movie called Miss Juneteenth that came out, and it was, I don't remember the director, but it was by a Black creator, and it it was about Juneteenth, and like I just remember, like, it was a fiction movie about a real thing, but yeah, just being like even open to like, oh, this isn't how I've watched movies or experienced movies before, because it felt different. Like, it just, even just watching it, I was like, oh, this is different. I don't see anybody in this movie that looks like me. And being open to like, oh wait, this is how a large percentage of the US population sees movies. And just even being open to that was difficult.
Yeah.
Kind of tangent there. But.
I have a resource I thought I would share. And this one can be hard to digest or ingest, whatever the word is. It's a podcast by Scene on Radio, and they did a series at one time called Seeing White. And so they just went through and they did a section on like how we got races, how we decided to split people up into races, what white originally meant and what it still means, and what whiteness did to different aspects of our life, and how different aspects of our life are specifically the way they are because of the invention of whiteness, and whiteness as a political power, basically, or a social status. So I wanted to put that out there. I'll put that in, we post these videos on YouTube and then put that on the church website too. If you see on the website, you don't usually see the notes, but if you go to the YouTube channel, you can see all the notes that we put in there. So I'll put that link in there.
I just wanted to say too, Melissa, because you brought it up a couple of times, and you know, saying words like whiteness and blackness to some people, there will be a catch, because I know that, and I say that personally because there has been in me, like you kind of, I've stumbled over my words in conversations, and that's why I love what you're trying to, the intention behind the curriculum. But I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, if people are listening to this and they can't, you know, there are some words that are stated that they just can't really get away from, or it makes them feel a certain way, that it just keep listening. And I would ask you, Sierra, or you, Zach, you know, what do you say to somebody who does feel uncomfortable around the use of words like that?
I mean, I think my response would kind of be similar to what I was saying earlier, is, and I, you know, continuously have to, like you're saying, like remind myself this, but when people talk about whiteness, it's a power structure, it's a societal thing, not to say that it's not very real, but it's a big thing, it's a system, it's power, it's all of these things, and it's not me as a white person, right? And so I think just being able to recognize that it is a really big system that's at play, that has a history, that is backed up by legislation, right? And maybe that isn't like super helpful, but I just think just remembering like, oh, we're talking about a system. We're not talking about Zach. We're not talking about Terri necessarily.
Or skin color always, because there's a whole set of criteria of like originally what would make someone white, and a lot of it has stuck.
Yeah.
When I did live in Mexico for a little while, I remember having a playful argument with one of the kids there because my skin was darker than his, and he called me white, and he said he was brown and I was white, and I was like, but look at our arms, and I would put my arm next to his arm. I was like, I'm browner than you. He's like, that's not what I'm talking about. He's like, you are white. And when, it's not like I really needed to win the argument, but I was playing with him. But yeah, there's a whole set of things there. Sometimes of the year I can be browner than some people that would identify as a person of color, but I live a life of whiteness, and so whiteness isn't just skin color and isn't just anything. It's a whole set of things. And I think that misunderstanding, the reason I bring it up a lot is because I feel like it helps take away a misunderstanding, hopefully, where it's not like we're not trying to pick on a certain skin color and say your skin color did some bad things, and so now you guys have to be subject to this skin color instead of that one, or whatever. You know, I'm not trying to say that there's a wrong way to look or a wrong heritage to have. It's a matter of I don't know, bringing to light the system that we are all in, and whether you know it or not, but there are just different ways that I will move about the world. Usually, most of the time, if I look white, that I will live within a certain system on one side of the system, and it helps to know that it exists.
Yeah. And that's like, I think too, like just that feeling of feeling really uncomfortable, like, oh, you're talking about my skin color or the word white is bad. I think my invitation for people would be to sit in it a little bit. Right, to talking about funny white culture things, one of them that comes up often is the desire to fix things. Right, like, I mean, duct tape, if it ain't fix, it ain't, or if it isn't broke, don't fix it, but then we fix it anyway. Things like that. And so I think two reactions that I see commonly when people feel uncomfortable is aversion and wanting to like distance themselves, or a desire to move through it. Right? We even call ourselves a post-racial society. It's like, well, if that were true, we wouldn't be having these conversations. Right? It's because we want to be through the pain and through the discomfort, or we want to averse ourselves to it. So I would say, like, even just taking like, oh, right, like, should have said this in the beginning, but like, if you have aversion to us saying like Black people or white people, like, take like 3 deep breaths into that and sit in it a little bit and ask yourself why you feel comfortable. And I think learning to be present in the discomfort is an important thing in conversations about race and culture and injustice, because it's not a comfortable thing to talk about. And it's biblical. I'll throw that out there. There's lots of like just good examples of people in scripture that are in situations that are uncomfortable and they take time to pray or fast or meditate in the middle of something that requires their immediate attention, and they pause and say, I need to figure myself out a little bit here.
So you're talking about discomfort. We don't like that usually. That also reminds me of just the fact that this journey can be hard and taxing, and you get misunderstood from people of all races because we're just trying a thing, and it's hard to do a thing when it's sensitive. So when things get really tough, what keeps, anybody on the screen can answer this, what keeps you motivated to keep wanting to push in and not just be like, fine, like, who cares? Like, I don't know, who cares what's PC? I'm just going to live my life or whatever. What keeps you motivated?
I think.
Go ahead, Sierra. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's like my friends who are like people of color or who have marginalized identities, and just thinking like, oh, like, really I'm doing it for them, and not really, I mean, it would be easy for me to just cover my ears and go about my life and benefit from the privilege and have an easy life, but I think about my friends, and so when I'm having hard conversation with family, I'm like, okay, how is them being that much more conscious of what's happening gonna make them a safer person for my friend? Or how can I be a better friend? How can I learn better so that I don't inadvertently hurt my friends or ask them questions that are like upsetting or traumatizing? And so I think like just kind of framing it as like, oh, like, how can I be loving, like as an act of love and service, which sounds kind of weird, I think, but just like, how do I like love like Black people in my church? How do I love like people that I work with? How do I love my neighbors? How do I love my friends better? And then I think it is maybe like a little easier because it's not, oh, I'm getting in trouble for saying things or people don't like me because I'm white. It's like, oh no, like I'm trying to figure out how to love people well. And also it's okay for it to be hard, and it's okay to mess up. And like I was thinking a second ago, like it can feel really bad to be like called out or to have someone correct you. for like saying something wrong or asking the wrong question. But I think oftentimes like that's also an act of love on their part, because if they didn't love you, they probably would just not say anything. And so I think just kind of being in it, and thinking like just trying to love each other well is what I would say.
Good. Melissa, you had brought up the word, being misunderstood. And that's really a hard one. It's really a hard one for me because we never want to be misunderstood. And we always, want to come across as we're putting our best foot forward. And so in an attempt, when we are bringing, or we feel like our intention is to bring people together, but we're talking about hard things, and it feels like someone is accusing us of disunity, or, sometimes the light has to shine on us, like you were saying, Sierra. God in his immense love for us shines a light, and it's not to put us back on our place, but it is to shine his light on himself so that we can see really truly who we are in the face of him. And so it's like, it's always for our correction, is always for our good. Always. It's not just discipline and like, I'm going to bat you back over there, but it's that progress and that kingdom nature that keeps us going. And I have felt at times like, I'm like, my ego was crushed. And so maybe I should just not say or not do or not engage in these conversations because it's hard to feel understood. And yet I still feel this nudge, like Jesus was misunderstood, and still, even still, he persisted. And, if that's really if that's a piece of what taking up our cross looks like, just to kind of continue to bridge the gap, continue to engage in conversation, to have understanding when I don't. I think that's a good. That's kind of what keeps me going. Not always easy. Doesn't always feel good, but.
Did you have anything, Zach?
I've been thinking about a lot of different things to answer that, but one that does come to mind is I just remember, I don't remember where I was, but somebody gave a talk on Revelation and the idea of like every tribe, tongue, and nation kind of worshiping, and then like I just know that image plus this image of like the kingdom of God isn't complete unless everybody's included. So I'm like, I truly don't have a full picture of what the kingdom of God looks like without my friends. And I want the people around me to know what that image, like that kingdom of God looks like, with themselves and everybody around them who looks different than them or speaks a different language. And it's like, it's just that image really that kind of can push me forward, is like, the world will be less fun without my friends of color having a seat at the table. And so I want them to have an easier seat at the table, and to have a voice there. So I think that's a big part of it. And there's some other things in my head, but that's the gist.
I think for me, one of the hardest parts is that feeling misunderstood, because I can feel misunderstood by white people. I can feel misunderstood by people of color, of all different people of color. Or even I could perceive that I'm being misunderstood and I never know. But to combat that, I feel like it's, even when I'm feeling misunderstood, it's like, okay, there's still something to solve. Like that part of the white culture, which I have a lot, is I'm a problem solver and I want to fix it. And so it's like, okay, there's still work to do, basically. Like, okay, if we're still misunderstanding each other, even if it was me that was misunderstood, it's like, okay, then I need to work on my own, like, why was I misunderstood? And I need to work on how to be able to be understood better. And if it's me, not getting the other person, then still on my part, I get to figure out what their side is. So just exactly what you were saying, Zach, I had the same picture. It's like I'm constantly drawn to completing a picture, where I feel like we'll never really complete it because I'll never have met every human that ever lived. But if God is like placing their perspective into each of the people that are made, it's like then understanding another person or another culture is like you get to see that side of God, and you get to get more of the picture put together. And that might not be a draw for everybody, but for me, that's really motivating. And then I think the other thing that motivates me is that I just kind of like a good fight. I don't want to fight people, but I would love to fight like lies. I would love to fight the kingdom of darkness. I would love to fight, injustices or whatever. And so I feel like when I'm feeling at my worst, it's that I feel like there's nothing to fight for. There's no good I could ever do. And when I'm at my best, I'm feeling spunky. And with that side of me that has to fix things, a good balance for me, since I would naturally say, let me go in and fix everything and, let's say, take the lead and do everything for everybody else. Instead, it's like a good balance for me is like, okay, I want to fix stuff. Okay, fix me. Like, okay, I'll do the inner work. I'll do the looking into things and like, what do I need to know? What do I need to understand? Teach my own children, or make sure there's books around the house that have people that, like, when my kids were little, I would try and make sure there was books around the house that had people in other cultures just to be normal, like, here is another way someone goes to school. It looks like this, picture book of this. So yeah, I think as long as I can feel spunky, I feel motivated. And as long as I feel like there's more problems to solve, then I will feel spunky so that I can fight something. But as long as I try not to fight people, then I feel good. Any final words? I think we've covered so many good things.
Don't forget to breathe.
I don't know. I feel like we covered a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for your time. This is really valuable to us, to hear. And thank you for sharing so many stories, both of you, because I think, we've heard from other people that we've talked to that stories are so valuable, that component of seeing someone as, as another human being, not just someone who's different, but someone has a unique story and all the intricacies of that. So very, very cool.